Well, welcome everybody to TOSOT Time. And my friends, I could not be more excited about our guest today, a gentleman with a vast resume in stage, TV, film, but where I think most of you will know him from, at least most recently, is from the program Love It or List It, which is, I got to admit, a guilty pleasure of mine, to say the least. And people, please welcome our friend, Todd Talbot. Todd, welcome to TOSOT Time.
Gerry, thanks for having me.
Great,
I love
man.
the fact that you've got Toso right in the title because I think a lot of people have some different interpretations about how to pronounce that name. I I called it Tosot for a long time until I heard you say it, and I was like, I'm gonna go with what Gerry says.
Hey, I did it myself. The first time I ever saw the name at a convention, I said TOSOT. It's just the obvious way of approaching it, but it is Toso, or at least that's how the Chinese pronounce it. So I go with that for
Right.
sure. Well,
Perfect.
Todd, it's a special treat to have you as a guest on TOSOT Time. Hey, look, you do have this incredible, vast background in entertainment, and I will touch on that at some point today. But really, where I want to start is in your background and your current work in property development. So please share with our audience what led you into real estate development.
Well, like anything in life, it's it's a long and kind of windy journey to get to anything, any kind of segue or different piece of life that manifests. I live in Vancouver. Um, Really, it was. I often say it's because my parents decided to charge me rent after I moved back from theater school in England, and they said you're welcome to live here, but if you do want to, you're going to pay rent. And I was like, well, as much as I love you, I'm going to go out and get an apartment with a buddy of mine. And we looked and looked, and there was really nothing like in terms of what you would get for your money. And I'd saved up some, and ultimately ended up buying a place, renting out the second bedroom to my buddy Arnold. And um, I didn't know it at the time, but that was the beginning of me kind of understanding how to, well, first of all, become a landlord. Second of all, to kind of look at buying real estate from a slightly different perspective. I spent many, many years thinking about it more as an investment, even if it was your principal residence, because to me it was like I'm the renter to my investment portfolio.
Hmm.
And then it just grew from there. I had some sort of deep seated desire to renovate properties. This is long before HGTV or seeing other people do it. My parents built a log post and beam house on Salt Spring Island, which is one of the coastal islands off British Columbia. So I was around it. Um, but yeah, and just kind of one thing led to another. To make a long story longer, I was a theater actor for many, many years, and I realized that I wasn't necessarily going to have a pension. There was never going to be any
Yeah,
kind of financial stability from somewhere else
right.
as an independent artist, and I liked the idea of kind of creating that financial foundation through real estate that allowed me to do what I wanted to do, which was be an actor, and I was very fortunate in that. But so the real estate thing kind of just plodded along, and it was more like a hobby or a passion, and then it just kind of grew and grew. And I like to try different things, and it's kind of led us to this conversation today, really.
Yeah, very, very cool. You bring up an interesting side topic, and that is in entertainment. It's not a constant paycheck, like I'm used to, like most people are used to, and not a pension plan, or at least nothing set uh, generally. Last night I went to a concert here, right in town, of the Artemis Pyle Band and the Outlaws. These are two bands. Well, Artemis Pyle, the original drummer for Leonard Skinner, these guys are, well, Artemis is 74 years old, Todd, and still out there doing gigs. Now, I don't know if he needs it to do the money for the money. I hope not, but again, these guys, especially in musicians and entertainers from the 70s, they were on their own, and oftentimes got taken advantage of financially. So yeah, you're a smart guy. I knew that going in, but you're a smart guy to
Well,
think long term.
yeah, it's funny you mentioned that story because I was working with a famous kind of Canadian actor, theater actor, who was much older than me at the time. I was probably in my 20s, and I'd done a few shows with him. And I watched, he was probably in his late 60s at the time, and I watched him continually look for that next gig
Mm,
and feel that pressure. And I was like, ugh, I would I would love to build some sort of um, foundation where I didn't have to say yes to a gig I didn't want to take. Really,
yeah,
was
yeah,
kind of what it boiled down to. And I figured if I could figure out a way to have a few rental properties that would kind of cover that cost and pay for kind of my core living expenses, that would
yeah,
free me up to do what I want to do. So that was always my financial plan.
yeah.
It's a little more complicated now, but
Of course.
but that's the underpinnings of it.
Yeah.
Um,
No,
yeah.
brilliant.
So
Yeah. Um, so Todd, I met you through your A-frame project, or I like to say A-frame project, which is, I know I'm going to kill this, the name of the lake, so help me with it. Lake Akonkanen. I killed it, right?
yeah, you slayed it. Okanagan.
Okanagan. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no,
Lake
it's all good.
Okanagan, Lake Okanagan in Kelowna, British Columbia.
That's
So
right.
that's how we met, was through that project. Please tell our audience about the project and how you've gotten to the point where you're at now, which is, I think, pretty close to completion. You may disagree, but from my point of view, it looked like you were darn close. So please just update everybody about the A-frame project.
So my wife and I love taking on complicated builds. It's I don't know if it's you know uh, a punishment we like to put ourselves through, but we get very excited by these ideas when we start, and then somewhere along the line, I'm like, okay, we can never do this again. We found a challenging piece of property right on the lake. It's 2 acres. We bought it uh, after multiple people advised us not to buy it. Um, we bought it about 5 years ago, kind of before the explosion of popularity, at least in this little area. Um, and of course, pre COVID. So prices were much lower than they are now, with the idea of um, using the property as it was and just kind of seeing if we enjoyed it with the family, and then with the idea that we would potentially build something. um, we fell in love with the area and the experience of being on the lake, etc., and being able to have family and friends up here. And it seemed like a perfect, I don't know, piece of the puzzle for the next stage of our lives. Our kids were 5 and 6 at the time, and yeah, it was perfect. I referenced this earlier where I really had a certain lens when I looked at real estate. It was a very financial focused perspective, and I never put too much value on the experience of a space or a piece of property. But I just turned 50, and I think my kind of valuing of things have shifted over the last number of years, and maybe that's also being a parent. um, but yeah, so we wanted to create a space here that we could hang out, invite family and friends to, and so we began the journey of designing what this would look like. And we went through a number of iterations. Rebecca really kind of came back to this idea of a cabin, an A-frame. It's a throwback to the 60s, the 70s. We liked the architectural kind of massing of it. Um, A-frames also have a I guess a reputation for being an easy build,
Mm,
and so that had a certain appeal to it. Um, so we worked with our architect to kind of get to the stage, um, of how we're going to use this space. And I honestly, I felt a little indulgent about the fact that we would have a place in the city and a place, uh, you know, in a rural environment on the lake. And so I decided that I wanted to kind of push the envelope in terms of how we could make it as sustainable as possible. And that seed or that idea kind of led me down a rabbit hole. We first explored the idea of building net zero. Uh, and I've been in the real estate industry for a long time. I've seen more houses than probably any human on this planet. Um, and I think that there's things about the way that we're building our homes, and the longevity of our homes, the resilience piece, obviously the sustainability and different climate factors that we're dealing with now that just aren't being talked about very much. So I wanted to put my money where my mouth was, and use this as a learning experience for myself and be able to document it and share it with other people so that we could explore it, and figure out what is possible, what are some of the stumbling blocks to making this more mainstream. So we eventually got to this marriage of a very unique, somewhat complicated architectural design, pinning this A-frame on stilts off the side of a cliff, and also coupling that with the idea of building to passive house standards, and using a solar array to essentially make our build net zero. Um, and then, you know, that led me down an incredible path of learning, and I still am. So, we're essentially now, this is our third summer of building, and it's a very lean crew. It's me and a friend of mine, Peter. And occasionally we have one or two other people who kind of join us who might be specialists in certain areas. But really, the heavy lifting of this, I like to call it my midlife crisis. Some people buy cars or whatever they do. Uh, I'm a glutton for punishment. I love to build. It's kind of my happy place. Um, and yeah, we're just very meticulously chipping away at this process, but we're at the rough in stage now. We have the roof on, the windows,
Yeah.
so we're over the hump. But
Yeah.
and there's a light at the end of the tunnel.
Absolutely. It's interesting. You mentioned somewhat of the history of the A-frame design being perceived as a inexpensive build. Well, I'm a child of the 70s. I grew up in New York and New Jersey. And for us, the country was the Pennsylvania Poconos, right?
Right.
And the most popular build by far in the 60s and the 70s in the Poconos was the A-frame, again, because it was indeed an inexpensive build. But I would suggest to you, Todd, that there's probably a handful of those A-frames left on this planet. They just didn't hold up over time. Your A-frame, even though we're calling it an A-frame, let's be honest, of the highest level, not the A-frame that most people envision, especially those from the Pocono days. So, yeah, a very interesting architectural design that you've come up with. And another thing you mentioned that I just want to touch on real quick is net zero.
Hmm.
You know, um, I guess I always start from a skeptic's point of view, and that's my problem. But you know, we're going solar here. Patricia and I are going solar here with the house and with this structure, the TOSOT Time studio. We are having two photovoltaic arrays installed. Uh, Not taking us off the grid, you still have to be on the grid, but it will produce 116% of the energy that we need year round. It's going to be a beautiful thing. But we didn't do it for a net zero issue. We didn't even do it from an environmental issue. We did it from an economic point of view, and that is the utility cost here in Pennsylvania. It just out of hand, just unbelievable. Just in the 3 years we've been here, it has more than doubled. But getting back to my point about net zero, So the panels come from Korea, the inverters come from Germany. You know, again, I always go back a few steps. What fossil fuels were burnt to get those products here? And again, net zero should always be the goal. Absolutely. But is it real? Sometimes you scratch below the surface and it's an awfully hard goal to reach, but it should always be the goal, I guess is what my point is.
Yeah. So let me just comment on net zero, because
Yeah.
I had heard this term for many years, and kind of, to be honest with you, didn't really understand what it meant.
Yeah.
So I started down this path of being like, kind of, oh, let's make it net zero. That sounds good. That should accomplish something.
Yeah.
And when I realized that, in my opinion, net zero is a mathematical formula, it doesn't address some of the underpinnings that you talk about, which is, from a sustainability standpoint, it doesn't necessarily address those issues. It also doesn't necessarily address the energy efficiency of a home. So the example that I like to say is, you know, uh, when you combine it with a high performance build, passive house standards, those types of philosophies of construction, that's when you get kind of the best of both worlds. So, if you could put a solar array all the way up our property here for 2 acres, and then take a drill and drill holes in our building, and then use your beautiful heat pump to just cool and heat that thing all year long, and we could still be net zero if we had enough solar panels.
Right.
So to me, it's slightly misleading. It's only one part of the equation. And in terms of, uh, you know, uh, residential design, the net zero conversation is really about, how are we going to generate some energy? And to your point, I actually think that piece of the conversation is much more economical. It's a financial decision first and foremost, and should be. That's going to be the driving force that allows people to make that choice. Let's be honest. It's wonderful to sit around and talk about, it's a sustainable choice, or it's environmentally friendly, and all of that garbage. I mean, I do believe in it. That's why I'm doing it. However,
Sure.
it doesn't get any traction in the marketplace unless it makes financial sense. So you have to have that be the primary focus. And then you couple it with the fact that hopefully we can get to a point where it's also a sustainable and kind of green choice. But I think looking at it from the other way around is not that productive. And also, you have to couple it with how you're building, how you're renovating, how you are allowing your house to be energy efficient. So it's a
Yeah.
delicate thing. On most podcasts, I wouldn't even go that far into the explanation, but because you're very kind of niche focused on a certain element, the concept of how we're building our homes is something that people just don't even think about. I didn't for years and years and years. I mean, I love to renovate, but I never contemplated the air barrier. I never contemplated pushing the envelope in terms of how much insulation we're putting in.
Yeah.
I cheaped out on windows and doors because, it was an economic choice first and foremost. I didn't have the resources to do that. Heating and cooling was kind of an afterthought.
Right.
So all of these things are very kind of, we have to think of them as a whole unit, as opposed to separating them out.
No question. And Todd, you mentioned that wonderful heat pump, and we could not be more pleased at TOSO Bathica that you chose the TOSO product for the Aframe project. So I want to touch on that just for a minute. What brought TOSO to your attention? What was it about the TOSO product or our company that you felt was the right choice for the A-frame project? Now, we're going to have Joel Patan of Patan Heating and Air, who is your contractor who's installing the system. He'll be on the program as well, Todd, to talk about the more technical side of the choice. But what I'm interested in is kind of what brought us to your attention.
Yeah. So I guess first and foremost, just to talk about the system itself, a heat pump,
Yeah,
which I think that there's a lot of there's a big gap in people's knowledge around heat pumps.
no
Um,
question.
and a lot of the information that people know is old and out of date. So I don't know when heat pumps were originally designed or brought into the marketplace, but you know, there was a lot of stigma around the fact that you couldn't install them in a cold climate.
Right.
They weren't super efficient. There was a number of kind of strikes against them. But as the technology has grown, I became more aware and more kind of conscious about making the choice of heat pump. The Canadian government is very, very bullish on transitioning people to electrification and also using heat pumps for heating and cooling.
No
And
question.
I did a campaign with them about a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, that allowed me to kind of learn more about heat pump technology. So that's number one, and that convinced me that that was the route that we would be taking here with this build. Coupled with the fact, and I mentioned it, is the fact that it's electric, and that was an important piece for me. So we started with that component. Um, in any high performance build like this, you start to gather passionate people around you who understand the dynamics of this unique way of building. And it becomes a very, very small circle of passionate people. And it's a an intricate referral basis because there's not a lot of people who understand intimately the dynamics of how all of these components need to work together. So I was put in touch with a passive house design team called Nido Design here in the Okanagan Valley in British Columbia, who referred me to Joel Patton, and I had him come out. In fact, we started this conversation about 2 years ago, where he came out to site. I discussed what my goals were around this build, and we evolved kind of the plan with him as it took shape. As we've mentioned, it's unique, um,
Mm.
and so some of the applications are needed to be, you know, creatively built during the process.
Yeah.
Um, I hope that one of my strengths is deferring to experts in certain areas. Ultimately, the decision comes down to me. It's my home, it's my build,
Sure.
but I do want to gather as much information as possible. So the thing I loved about Joel was that he was super passionate about high performance homes and the world of heating, cooling, and air exchanging, which all kind of tie together. He was quick to recommend TOSO and connected us, and really I leveraged his knowledge to kind of make the choice. I think there was a couple of things that were determining factors. Number one was our climate. Um,
Yeah.
so we do have extremes here. We get very
Sure.
hot in the summer. We're pushing into the high 30s, low 40s, um, and we get very cold in the winter. Not quite as extreme, but
Right.
we can get down into the high teens, low 20s, and this is Celsius because I'm Canadian.
Yep.
Um, and so you'll have to put a disclaimer somewhere to transfer
Understood.
that into Fahrenheit. I can't do that.
I can't
Um,
do it either.
um, and so, we needed to make sure that the product that we chose could handle both of those extremes. Um, so Toso became, the front runner. And then, honestly, it was my conversation with you. You and I got connected. You shared a little bit about it, and once you start kind of hearing from a few different people and doing a little bit of research, and as these things come together, um, it became clear that that was going to be a great choice. We
And
haven't
most
turned it on yet, though. So I will say that we should do like a 5-minute recap because I think I think for people installing this type of technology in their homes who haven't had air conditioning or heating through
Mm,
a heat pump, people like I get asked these questions all the time. So, is it loud outside? Is it Does it perform well in the winter? Which is kind of the Canadians' default question. But
right.
more and more now, we're experiencing as we speak. I believe we just hit the two hottest days on the
Yeah.
planet back
Yeah.
to back.
Yeah.
So whatever your political biases around climate change, I could care less. The fact
Yeah.
is that we're dealing with it right now, um, and yeah. So I mean, it was a multitude of bits and pieces of information that led us to this decision. But I'm fascinated by um, getting this turned on and being able to experience it firsthand. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, that's all that matters is how it performs for how you live in that space. And sometimes we get super technical and we forget about that.
Todd, it's interesting you mentioned about misinformation about heat pumps in general and the history of heat pumps. Well, again, I'm an old guy, and I grew up in this industry with my father, who was in the boiler manufacturing industry his entire adult life. And in the boiler business, there was a joke back in the 70s, and that was you would never install a heat pump north of Richmond, Virginia, because a heat pump in the 70s stopped working at about 47-degree Fahrenheit outdoor air. That was it. It wasn't derated at that point. It was over. It was off. That was all you were going to get. So anything north of Richmond, Virginia, you wouldn't take on that liability. The colder the climate, it just wasn't a practical source. But now, we talk about heat pumps that will heat down to negative 33 Fahrenheit. And again, I apologize to our audience. I don't know how to convert that to Celsius, but that's super low outdoor air temperature. And it is the technology that has brought us to this point. And it puts me personally in a unique position. I feel that now we need to re-educate not only the trade, but the general public, as you mentioned, because there is this misinformation or old. It's not so much anybody trying to fool anybody. It's just old information.
Yeah.
And we're in this process of re-education. And as the vice president of business development, one of my primary functions is training, and that's what keeps me on the road 36 weeks out of the year. So it's an ongoing process. I think we're making progress for sure, but yeah, it is a process nonetheless, especially with the general population, to get them to understand that these are cold climate heat pumps. They will work in British Columbia, Canada, and even in more northern applications as well. So yeah, there's a lot of work yet to be done, but we're thrilled that you chose TOSO for the Aframe project, to be sure. Hey, Todd, I want to talk a little bit about Kelowna, British Columbia, and specifically the lake region there. I would think, like myself, until I actually went to visit you, I wasn't familiar with how beautiful it was and the advantages there. Please fill in our audience about what appealed to you and your family, but also just about the area in general. Fill us in about it.
So first of all, where is Kelowna? First of all, it's in the Okanagan Valley. So when you think about the Okanagan Valley, it's central British Columbia. It's about a 4-hour drive from the coast, from Vancouver. Most people know where Vancouver is.
Sure.
So you got a 4-hour drive through the mountains, um, and you come to the Okanagan Valley, which is centered around Lake Okanagan. Has three main kind of hubs. On the very south end of the lake is Penticton, and then central in the lake is Kelowna, the largest of the three cities on the lake, and then the northern city is Vernon. And I grew up coming to the Okanagan, going to a very small town on the south near Penticton called Naramata. Naramata is very famous now for their wine production. In fact, the Okanagan Valley is kind of, for your American listeners, maybe a Napa kind
Yeah,
of
sure.
situation. So lots of wineries, there's a huge industry for that. Lots of people come here for that experience. But back in the day, it was orchards and fruit production. And it was a great place to come here in the summer. This is our cottage country, if you will, in British Columbia. And people obviously have started to live here full time. But in the past, myself included, we would come here for a week or two in the summer. And we, in season 5 of our shooting of Love It or List It, there was a decision made to shoot some of the episodes in the Okanagan area and some of them in Vancouver. So we'd go back and forth and kind of multitask a little bit and showcase a different part of the province. And so that's kind of what brought me back to this region as an adult. Um, and then ultimately, that kind of family experience on the lake was the thing that really attracted me to it. I grew up going to my grandparents' cottage in Manitoba and Ontario, and but yeah, it's a very warm, dry climate that gets cold in the winter. It's a very, very different climate than on the West Coast, which
Mm.
is, rainforest, very, very damp. So different construction styles up here, and different requirements from a heating and cooling perspective. And in more recent times, I don't remember it as much growing up. In fact, I don't remember it at all. And I was here, every summer. Um, there we've been battling some serious forest fires over the
Boy.
last number of years, and sporadically before that, but really fairly consistently over the last 2, 3, 4 years.
Yeah.
And so that's introduced a whole nother level of thought process around how we're going to live in this region. And we're not unique, obviously. It's happening all over the place, but um, yeah, so that's the Coles Notes of the Okanagan Valley. And you can swim in the lake, and it doesn't freeze in the winter. We Kelowna has an international airport that you flew into, so
Yes.
lots of influence from Alberta as well. So lots of people move here from Alberta and also up from the coast, and that's put a lot of pressure on the housing market up here because it's been absolutely booming, um, and the trades.
Yeah. Yeah. One thing that blew my mind about the lake itself was the depth. Uh, Doug, uh, I guess I've been saying Patan, and you said Patton. I'll say Doug Patton.
TOSOT,
Fair, fair enough. But
Fahrenheit, Celsius.
Doug, Joel's dad, who is our distributor in Kelowna, mentioned to me that he had a boat at one time with a depth finder that the depth went beyond what the finder would calculate. It
Oh,
got so
no
deep.
question.
In fact, you guys have your own monster in the lake, do you
We
not?
do.
Yeah, yeah,
We're famous for this monster that lives in the lake. Much like Loch Ness, we
yeah.
have Ogopogo. We have a Canadian twist on the name. um, but one of the reasons why that legend persists is that it is said that they have never found the bottom of the lake. Therefore, there is no real way to prove whether Ogopogo exists or not. About about 30 yards out from the coastline, my depth finder goes up to 1,000 feet, and it clicks off like quite quickly. So this is a very, very deep lake.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Unbelievable. Have you ever seen the monster?
It's hard to say. Um, there are definitely moments where you think you see something,
Yeah.
but notoriously shy, I think, would be a good way to describe Ogopogo. I've never
Well,
had to, fight it or anything like that yet.
right, right. Well, Doug had mentioned to me that those who don't believe there's actually a monster just chalk it up to a very large sturgeon, which I can completely appreciate. There's sturgeon in the Hudson River, and first of all, a sturgeon, very prehistoric looking. I mean, this most bizarre looking thing, and they're huge. They're the size. I mean, I saw them the size of our boat when we were in New York. So
Right.
yeah, I could possibly buy into it just being a big old sturgeon, but the monster theory is a lot more fun for sure. Hey, look, Todd. With the A-frame, what's your ultimate goal? Is it a flip? Well, not a flip because you're creating it, but is it something that you plan on developing and selling? Is it a forever country home for you and the family? What's your ultimate goal with the A-frame?
Yeah, I think for this, it has a very different criteria for me in terms of the lens of a real estate investor. This is a generational piece of property.
Yeah.
I've already told my kids who are young that they're not allowed to sell it. Obviously, I can't guarantee that, but
Yeah.
it's my plan to have this be a space that hopefully my family can use for generations. Um, but more importantly, that even if it does get sold one day to somebody else, that it stands for generations. I've been watching homes in Vancouver that were built in, the 2000s, maybe 1990s. I guess, we're talking less than 30 years ago, being torn down and replaced with other ones. Sometimes out of land value, but a lot of times because the construction just wasn't good, and the design and the forethought and the care and attention put into it just wasn't good enough. And I think that that's a piece of the sustainability puzzle that we're not addressing enough, is to
Yeah.
take a little bit more time. And part of the problem is, with real estate booms and construction booms, sometimes there are corners that are cut, or the path of least resistance is taken. So part of this journey for me is to see how resilient I can make this building, not only for kind of climate and today, but how long can it last into the future? Can we make this building last a few hundred, 100 years,
Right.
as opposed to 50 or 75?
Right.
Um, so yeah, it's and truthfully, because I put so much time and effort and blood, sweat, and tears, and all three of those have happened on numerous occasions. Um, that it's not something that I'm looking to sell. I definitely want to experience it, but I also want other people to experience it. Like I've never actually stayed in a passive house. I've walked through them. I've talked to other people. I've done a lot of that, but I've never really lived in that environment. And I think that'll be interesting.
For sure. I mentioned this when we were together at the home, that for your children, I have to believe this home will be utopia for young children. I mean, the lake and the mountain and the surrounding area, just the birds that I saw while I was spent the day with you there, just so beautiful. Yeah, I just got to believe for children, and ultimately, as you mentioned, their children, your grandchildren, it will be literally a little piece of heaven, absolute utopia.
I hope so. That's
Yeah,
the goal. Yeah.
for sure.
I
Well,
also
that's
think at this stage of construction, like high performance homes, the problem with it is the math doesn't work quite yet. When if you're building a spec home, you're not going to get that return on investment that a traditional investor, in real estate investor or developer, is going to be looking for. And that's a problem. So we've got this issue where prices are coming down, and most of it is in terms of design and efficiency. How fast can you build to this standard?
mm,
Because in this industry, time is money. So if you move quickly, you can't build to this kind of detailed structure, and that raises the cost. And of course, there are other costs associated with it, but um, so there's still some room for improvement in terms of high performance building.
no question. Hey, Todd. So what are your interests beyond the A-frame? And what I mean by that is, clearly you are into residential development, but do you dabble in commercial properties as well?
I have always had a little kind of side fascination with commercial real estate, but I
Yeah,
have never bought a piece of property. I've kind of explored it a couple of times. I'm a big believer in investing in what you know. Whenever I go and speak about real estate investing to whatever level of investor, whether it's a first time buyer or it's a seasoned investor, um, my experience is that most success and the safety element of it comes from a deep sense of knowledge. So stay in your lane and do what you know. Um, and commercial is outside of my comfort zone. Um,
understood. Yeah.
yeah, so I'm not saying that it wouldn't happen in the future, but I'm primarily focused on residential. The other reason I like residential is because I'm interested in how people live in their spaces, and mostly because most people live in a city environment,
Hmm.
and I see the challenges for families being able to afford staying in the city, etc. And so for a number of years now, I've been really interested in talking about how can we keep that going? How can people handle higher prices? Yeah, so I'm just kind of all in on the residential side of it in all capacities.
Yeah, gotcha. Todd, I want to go back to your answer to the previous question just for a second. Something you said made me think about another issue, and you said you wanted this property to be a generational property for your family. Um, are there seismic issues in British Columbia that you had to be concerned about with the design?
So I'm not a geotechnical engineer.
Yeah.
Just as a side note,
Right. Right.
in Vancouver we have a lot more seismic regulations because I believe we are on the San Andreas Fault,
I would think so. Yeah.
which is a continuation from California all the way up.
Yeah.
So there's lots of training, lots of conversation, lots of elements built into our building codes, especially for high rise construction and those types of things. So on the coast, we're a little bit more conscious of it. Single family homes, there's not that much kind of structural conversation around it, and I would say even less so in this region. We're inland. We're actually pinned right to bedrock. Um, we drilled 1 inch rods 3 feet into the ground for each footing. So that component, while I guess is a possibility, is not likely in this region.
Understood. And again, spending the day with you there, I think what was the most impressive out of a very impressive day was looking at the footings that you just described. I can't, that had to be the most challenging part of this build to date. Would I be right with that, Todd?
Yeah, no
Y-
question. I mean, there's
Yeah.
definitely been a lot of significant challenges along the way, but getting those footings right. So painting a quick picture for people, basically each leg on a 65.5-degree angle is individually pinned every 7 feet into the bedrock. And we pinned into the bedrock and poured a footing, and then we created kind of like a buttress cap on top of that had a metal bracket that received this 12 by 6 fir beam that then shot up into the air and created the main floor assembly, and then further connected up all the way to the peak. But those elements, the tricky part about it was that we're not building on flat ground. So
Yeah.
each and every footing was located on a different elevation. So height became a calculating factor for each footing, but also distance in and out from the center line of the building. So if you're
Yeah.
lower, obviously that footing goes further out. So there was really limited ways to kind of cross check and cross reference. whether everything was absolutely perfect. And when we started the process, I remember being on a Zoom call with the structural engineer and a few other folks. And, I said, what is the variance that I have to work with? Like, can we be an inch off? And I think they stopped themselves from laughing at me, but ultimately they were like, no, you have no variance. Like, it's zero tolerance. So the pressure to get that piece right, so that over, in some places over 60 feet in the air, we have to meet up on two sides
Yeah.
perfectly at a 65.5-degree angle. Not to mention that those two sides have to meet up, but everything has to plane all the way back. And we have seven footings down each side, so 14 of these little buttress footings. And I cannot describe to you how incredibly pressurized that was for myself. I carried that burden.
What, Todd? I've been reminded at least 3 or 4 times in as many weeks about why we learn geometry in high school, huh?
Right. I'll tell you this.
Because everything you just described is geometry, baby.
Oh yeah, and I mean geometry. Also using technology in terms of survey equipment, and then common sense.
Yeah.
So using elements to push even the structural engineer's drawings to find a setting out point that made sense in the construction point, because a setting out point on the rock didn't help me once I was constructing a buttress footing 4 feet in the air. We had to extrapolate that on a 65.5-degree angle, which is a very difficult thing to do on uneven ground. So
Right.
there,
Right.
it pushed the boundaries of a lot of people, myself included. That is an example of what a structural engineer does. They draw how you are going to build, what lumber, what dimensions, what fasteners, what brackets. Basically, they create the roadmap for the construction process. They take the concept drawings, the architectural drawings, and then they figure out how it's actually going to be built, and then the builder steps in and executes that plan. Now, of course, the structural engineer needs to sign off at a number of stages along the way, and then, of course, you get to your final inspection where they see the whole thing come together, and that was today. And I don't know, I got nothing to cheers with. Can't 7-Up. Woohoo! Yay!
Yeah. Todd, it's one of the many things that I love about the construction trades. Uh, Most people, civilians, I'll call them, think of the construction trades of people just using their hands. But it's so much more than that, as you just described. When you use your mind and your hands, that's when we create craft. That's when we create art, right? And
Yeah.
and that's what I love about the trades. You can be an artist, you could be a craftsperson. It's a beautiful thing. You use so many elements of your brains and your hands to
I,
do the
I
right job.
I think so too. And one of the things I've been blown away with is people like Joel and
Yeah,
others who have come to this project and they feel a sense of pride,
yeah,
and the more creativity they have to bring to their problem solving from their area of expertise. If you find the right people, that excites them.
yeah,
If you find the wrong person, you're going to hear some cautionary tones in their voice. This is going to be difficult. It's going to be
yeah,
expensive. I'm not sure, blah, blah, blah. If you get those tones, even if you're doing a renovation in your own house in the middle of suburbia, that is not the right person. The right person comes with a sense of energy, solutions, and really should be a collaborator and put you at ease as opposed to trying to scare you. If anyone tries to scare you in this process, they're the wrong person for the job. And I'll add one more thing: is that a number of the elements that make a home perform you never see. And this is where craftsmanship, I think, doesn't get recognized enough.
Right.
Because once you drywall and you're into the finishings that you get to see in a magazine, those become the important ones. And
Right.
I'll blame the world of, you know, HGTV is great, but it tends to, and rightly so, it's more entertaining. Everyone likes to see the finished product.
Sure.
It tends to lean into paint color choices, lighting, countertops, a kitchen renovation, opening up a wall as really the fundamental core elements of what makes a home function.
Right.
And it's really the last thing. If you don't have those
Yeah.
foundational components correct, that home doesn't perform. Like, it's nice to have, a fancy sound system in your car, but if that car doesn't start, run efficiently, uh, none of that matters.
Well, you just described my car in high school. It had a great sound system, but
Yeah,
it didn't run half the time.
yeah. It's because most people who own homes know as much as we did when we bought our first car when we were 16 years old.
Right. Right. Yeah. Well, look, Todd, again, spending that day with you at the A-frame home, um, one of the many things that blew me away about you personally was your hands-on element to this project. Now, again, most of our audience know you from the Love It or List It project program, and I think most of us watch those shows and think you guys are actors, you know. But I saw you. I have a film of you, my friend, taking the lead of carrying that 42,000 BTU multi-zone TOSO outdoor unit underneath the home, right? On a steep, rocky, loose rocky, may I say, hill with, of course, Joel and his crew, but you being the lead man.
Okay, nice and slow through here so that we don't slip.
Good this time?
Yeah. You watch your heels there, Todd. Yep, got it. Actually, you know what? Let's just keep going straight. Okay.
Good.
Absolutely hands-on. So where I'm going with this, and my question is, where did you get these skills, Todd? Because, yes, you are a TV host. Yes, you are an actor, but man, you blew me away with your hands-on skills. So where did that come from and how did that get developed?
Really, it was just over the years. Um, when I first started renovating, I would bring in people to help me. And the deal that I had with every single one of them, and it doesn't work for everybody,
Hmm.
is I'm working with you and we're doing it together.
Right.
So I'm going to learn from you through this process. And if that's not a fit for you, no problem. Because, lots of contractors say there's one price for me to do it. And then if you're going to help, it's going to be more expensive.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess
Again, not the guy for the job, right?
not the guy for the job.
Yeah.
So, I spent a long time over the last kind of 20 years doing multiple renovations and builds. Uh, I think a certain level of interest and passion is important because that's what kind of keeps you driving forward. I like the feeling of when you're in theater or film and television or even shooting, a reality show like Love It or List It, those elements a lot of those elements are out of your control. You bring
Mm.
one little piece of the puzzle to it and then they're gone. Especially live theater. You do the work, a show runs for 3, 4, 5 months, and then it's over.
Right.
And so there was something about working with my hands and being able to create something and stand back and look at it that kind of fed a different part of me. Um, and I think I'm never afraid to ask questions.
Mm.
I start off, working with my structural engineer, being like, I'm going to call you with some stupid questions, so just be prepared. And he's like, no problem, I'll charge you for those stupid questions.
Right.
But like I'm like, look, I don't know what that is. I mean,
Yeah.
I know a lot now, but like in the past, I would be like, I don't know. And so I'd ask, and it's not rocket science. But yeah, so I kind of built my knowledge base and my experience around different projects that I've done. Um, and in terms of this one, I do. There's a part of me, to be completely honest, is that I don't. I like to kind of shatter the image of certain things, and me running around as a realtor in a suit every day on television is not a true representation of who I am. I mean,
Yeah.
I enjoyed doing the show. There's no question about it. And it was
Mm,
fun and it created lots of different opportunities and all those great things. And I love showing people houses, but
mm.
that's not what I really do.
Right.
And so part of my, rage against the machine or the world or the man or whatever terminology you use is to, show people that, uh, a little bit more of an authentic side of who I am and what I like to do. And it's true. There's a lot of misrepresentation on television. A lot of
Yeah.
the people that you see out there as contractors, designers, realtors, they don't do that. They're actually not steeped in that information. And
Right.
there's part of me that it just bugs me that that's the truth. I'm not going to change it,
Right.
but yeah. So thank you for acknowledging my passion around getting my hands dirty, and I love it. I love it. In fact,
No.
Joel didn't want to carry that thing down. I'm going to throw him under the bus. He looked at the stairs. We had to go all the way down first to come back up,
Yeah.
and he's like, I don't know. And I was like, don't worry about it. It's going to be possible. I'm also ever the optimist, which I think you have to be. We're going to find a solution. We're going to figure this out. So I was just like, all right, I will say that thing is heavy
Yes.
and, and it's not weighted. Um, it's not balanced in
It's
weight.
awkward. Yes. Yeah.
It's awkward. So
Yeah. The
one
side with the
person,
compressor obviously is heavier. Yeah.
that's right. And so one person gets the
Yeah.
heavy side.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Anyways, we got it done.
What was equally impressive in that process of moving that unit was the cameraman. Because he's in that same environment, but looking through this little tiny lens, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And moving back and forth, it blew my mind to watch him as well, being aware of his surroundings. And yeah, very, very interesting process. It was an education for me on many, many levels for sure.
We should
So
tease Gerry that we have been shooting this as a documentary as well, kind of the
yeah,
journey of it from a construction standpoint, from a why we're choosing to do things the way that we're doing them, so that
right.
people can better understand kind of the process of high performance building, passive house construction, and all of the elements that play into that. Why is it important? And that's what we're exploring, that question, and hopefully showcasing that along the way. And you saw, some cameras here when you were here. We look forward to it's a long process to put those things together, and um, but we're in that process. So hopefully one day we'll be able to sit down and watch it and
Yeah.
and 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 remember the process and share that with everybody.
Well, Todd, that's a beautiful lead into my next question because I want to touch on what I call your other life, and that is in the entertainment, TV, film business. What are you doing now? What is your next project? What are you in the middle of as far as home improvement TV or film? What's next for you in that part of your life?
So one of the things that I wanted to do when I decided to leave Love It or List It, I the show was super successful, and
Yeah,
and I think there was a significant appetite to continue, but it was definitely time for. I did it for 8 years, and it was time for me to do something else.
yeah,
Much to people's surprise, I don't think people understood. You're leaving? I was like, yeah, I need to go. And part of that was to go back and do some live theater again. It was a huge part of my life for like 20 years. And so, unfortunately, the pandemic hit right at that time. So we were about to do a musical, which is, I did a lot of musical theater for a number of years, along with my wife.
yeah,
So we got through the pandemic, and the show that we were going to do was Crazy for You, which is a is a big Broadway musical, singing and dancing, Gershwin music, written by Ken Ludwig. And so we just finished that actually.
Oh,
So we
nice.
did that this spring. My wife and I played opposite each other, and so that was a very, it was a great experience to get back on stage.
Yeah.
So that was part of the other life.
Yeah.
Um, we're shooting this documentary around this production. There's a conversation around another show, but at the moment, honestly, my focus is to get this house done, and
Sure.
it's really all encompassing. And so I've, for better or worse, I have um, not said yes to any other any other things. I mean, that's kind of downplaying the fact that we have 50 things going on at the same time. We've got
Sure.
a complicated life going on, um, but in terms of doing something outside of this right now, I really need to get it done,
Yeah.
and we need to finish it, and then I can free up some space to do something else.
Understood. You mentioned that you did this play with your wife, Rebecca.
Yeah.
I also see that your son Kessler
Yep.
is a actor as well. Have the three of you ever done anything together? And what is that dynamic like at home to have three actors?
Well, and my daughter is really involved in kind of the theater side of
Oh,
things too. So,
yeah, nice. So
not as
four
interested.
actors.
Yeah, yeah. It's I guess it would be unique in some households, but it's just standard really.
It's your normal, sure.
Our kids have grown up. Rebecca was in Les Mis until Ashlyn she was 7 months pregnant with Ashlyn in Les Mis. So they've been around theater and film and television for a long time. Uh, Kessler's had the opportunity to do some really cool projects. I think the biggest one and the coolest one is a project called Lost Ollie, which is on Netflix. It's a 4-part miniseries, and it's a beautiful show. Some incredible performances, and it's about a boy and his stuffed rabbit, and Kessler plays the boy. Yeah, it's a beautiful show. So if people want to check it out, it's not young kids. It's aimed at kind of a wide range of people. Kind of it's slightly darker,
Yeah.
but we have. The practicalness of it is that we've got a drop that comes down in the kitchen, and we have to put up the damn cameras and lighting and put stuff on tape and film different things. And our schedules are all over the map. We don't
Yeah.
have a 9 to 5 life. It's kind of messy and complicated and wonderful, and just, yeah, it's just weird for a lot of people to understand. They're like, even my kids sometimes are like, Dad, what, are you going to get a job? Like, and I'm like, I work 7 days a week. What would you like me to do? Like, it doesn't look the way that we
Right.
traditionally think about things. So, yeah, yeah, our house is a bit crazy. It's messy. You know, we if we ever film in our house, of course, everything gets cleaned up and we make it look like it's perfect, but it's complete and utter bullshit. Like, and most of that crap you're seeing on social media and television it's all fake. It's just people tidy up and make it all look fun and stuff like that. But
Of course.
it's a lot of work too.
Yeah. But
Lots
it
of
also,
emotion.
from the outside looking in, it all sounds exciting at the same
I
time,
know,
and
and
I'm
it
sure it
is,
is.
and
Yeah.
it is, and
Yeah.
it is.
Yeah. Well, look, buddy, I want to get back to our main subject, and that is your real estate development life. I, to be completely honest, Todd, I'm I'm perplexed by the Canadian real estate market. I travel in my function of training, literally coast to coast throughout Canada, 36 weeks out of the year. And I talk to so many young people who are really feel that they're between a rock and a hard place, that the real estate market, uh, the costs the prices are so inflated in Canada that they feel they don't have an opportunity anymore for home ownership, and that's depressing, quite frankly. And I'm wondering, what advice, what guidance someone in your position and your point in your life, and with your knowledge, obviously, of the market, what would you advise young people who kind of feel they're in that hole, that they can't look for home ownership as a possibility? What can they do? What can they do to give them that light at the end of the tunnel?
It's a complicated answer
Yeah.
because the thing about it is that every region, every area, even little micro areas within a city have different dynamics and different cost structures. So,
Yeah.
um, generally speaking, though, it is, especially in some of the major cities in the United States and in Canada,
Yes.
it's hyper expensive.
Yes.
And there's lots of people kind of thinking about and sharing their thoughts around where they think prices are going to go. Like that's like, either talking about the Super Bowl or talking about real estate prices. Like that's what people do.
Right.
The there's kind of two ways to look at um, where we're headed. And the reason why I think it's important to look forward is whether you're a first time buyer or you're kind of in the market now is your perspective on where things are going is going to um, help you make the decisions today about what you think you should and should not do.
Right.
So if you look at it, you got your macro perspective and then you got your micro perspective. From a macro perspective, I'll just talk about Vancouver, the greater Vancouver area as one of the major real estate markets globally.
Sure.
Uh, Very, very expensive, like
Mm.
incredibly expensive.
Yeah. Yeah.
A tear down. I don't think you can buy a detached home in the city of Vancouver for under 1.7,
Mm.
6, 5, somewhere in there.
Yeah.
We've seen prices come down just a little bit, but I mean, you're putting in another $400,000 or $500,000 into it. So you're kind of at that $2 million mark, 1.8, and that is prohibitively expensive for a lot of people. Now, if you look at it from the big picture, we are in an incredible place in the world. Lots of people want to live there. The underpinnings of real estate is really supply and demand,
Sure.
which is a very simple economic concept. Are more people moving to that area? Are people going to want to live there in the future? Is there a limited supply? So these are some of the core fundamentals that we look at. And from that perspective, you answer yes most often, that you're going to see more pressure in that realm in the greater Vancouver area than you're going to see a letting up of that pressure. So it tends to lead you down the path of thinking, yeah, it's going to be more expensive in the future. So if you want to stay in that region, you got to figure out a way to get your foot in the door.
Yeah.
No pun intended. Now, if you're looking at like little elements of it, you can sometimes get distracted by the fact that you're like, well, how is this even possible for people?
Mm.
Like, and so you end up kind of in this push and pull. I find myself in it too, trying to understand. Um, it really comes down to the fact that, especially in Vancouver and a lot of cities, we have a bunch of detached homes that are really a throwback to the 1950s, 60s, 70s, this urban sprawl, this idea, the American dream, which is, a house with a double car garage and a picket fence and a big backyard. This kind of idea in our urban environment, that ship has sailed. It's
Yeah.
done. It is no longer the goal, and it is no longer attainable for most people. So we have to reprogram how we're living in our cities. And part of that is wrapping our head around um, how we use our space, both inside the house and outside, shared space outside. I'm a big proponent in the urban environment of less space. Let's
Mm.
stop celebrating the 4,000 square foot home and start celebrating how we actually use our homes and build them to the size and find the space that we actually need. So that's one piece. We went down a long journey in our family of moving from a 3,000 square foot home to 1,200 square feet, family of 4. We loved it. Net result, better life, smaller space in a more connected area of the city.
Interesting.
So I truly believe that some of that reprogramming is necessary. So that's
Yeah.
number one. Zoning is another huge issue. But and I won't even get into that today. But in terms of people trying to get into the market, I think you need to recalibrate what it means to live in that city. So really being honest about the space that you need. Is a condo going to be sufficient for your lifestyle in the city?
Mm.
Could you live comfortably in a townhouse? Would you look at bringing some creativity into the process? How about buying a house with 2 other friends? Some of these elements, it goes back to me buying my very first condo. Well, I couldn't afford to manage it myself, but I rented the second bedroom out to a buddy of mine, which paid for half of the mortgage.
Right.
So
Right.
it got me into the process, got me into the game, so to speak. And I think that there's a lot of unknown information, especially with first time buyers, that if they thought outside the box a little bit more, it might help them figure out a way to get into the game. And the other thing is, with today now, you can work remotely. Maybe you're
Yeah.
not living in the city. So some of these things, you really have to identify what is the most important thing to you, and then chase that down. And then ultimately, at the end of the day, time. If you can figure out a way to get in early, over time, that asset is going to come back and help you out financially, like none other, really.
Yeah.
So, I encourage people to learn about the process, learn about different ways to get into it, understand how mortgages work. The financing piece, people don't like to talk about it because it's like, ugh, it's kind of scary, and no
Yeah.
one likes to talk about money or share numbers and all that kind of stuff. But really, that is the most important part. You're in business with the bank, so figure that out. Figure out what's possible, and then design how you might be able to get into the market that way. But it's expensive. There's just
Yeah.
no two ways about it.
Well, I think you offer some interesting options, and the one that jumped out at me is partnership with friends. Why not? If you're a single person, that may not be a good situation for a family. But if you're a single person, why not? Why not
Well,
take on a partner?
the duplex was essentially designed for a home with 2 families.
There you go.
So
Yeah.
I mean, there's lots of possibilities. There's laneway homes, coach houses. There's ways to look for highest and best use of your property. If you need to offset some of that cost, what could you do? Could you put some, could you rent out your garage? Could you build a laneway home? So there's lots of different elements. Could you, run your business out of, a basement office that you're paying $3,000 a month somewhere else, but you could renovate that space for 25 grand and amortize that over the next 5 years.
No
There's
question.
different ways to do this. In the city, we've got one example is we've got a 7-unit apartment building, and we rent out the parking because the people who live there don't have cars.
Right.
So
Right.
we rent out the parking. There's
Beautiful.
you just have to think a little bit more creatively, and I think we default to the kind of an older way of thinking.
Yeah, no question. Like you said, that American dream, single family home, picket fence, the whole thing. Yeah, I think a bottom line to many of the suggestions you gave is a property that has income potential,
Hmm.
right? I mean, beautiful thing. Absolutely a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
Well, Todd, we're coming to the end of our time together. And I want to offer you this opportunity. At the end of every TOSOT Time program, I have something that I call Gerry's Pick of the Month, where I just give a recommendation on a book, a documentary, a tool, just something that I've discovered in the last 30 days that was a real turn on for me. and I just want to share it with our audience. And I've decided to let you be the first guest to also share in that. Now, I know
Okay.
you recommended your son's miniseries, so you've given us one already. But is there something, a book, anything that just kind of really blew your mind recently that you would like to share with our audience?
I'd love to say I've read a book in the last 10 years, but I haven't. Uh, okay, so I saw this question that you put in the email, but
Yeah,
I thought I'm just gonna go gut instinct on it. I'll throw two out to you. So Lost
good.
Dolly, you mentioned it on Netflix, but the other one is a website called Passive House Accelerator. I don't
Okay.
know who, like, I have no connection to them. It is the greatest breakdown of kind of the passive house principles, why, how, all of those things. They actually break it out why, how, and it's very simple. If I can understand it, you can understand it. So if anyone's interested in high performance passive house construction, passivehouseaccelerator.com. So that's number one.
Beautiful.
That's tie into what we've been talking about today. The other one, my daughter and I have been watching on Netflix Abstract,
Mm,
which is a design-based kind of docu-series focusing on different designers and different mediums, like the guy who created the Air Jordan running shoe or
yeah,
basketball shoe,
yeah.
an architect, a costume designer. So these little bite-size episodes um, were fascinating. So if people are interested in that element, then there's two ideas for you.
Oh, very cool. We appreciate that. I'm definitely going to check all three of those out. And most importantly, your son's miniseries. That sounds like a cool one for sure.
Yeah.
Todd, my friend, I could not thank you enough for being so generous with your time. Both my day with you at the A-Frame project some weeks back, and of course, our interview today. I feel we've become friends. I very much appreciate our friendship and our business together. And Todd, thank you so much. I love you, my friend.
Gerry, amazing. Thanks for having me on your show. And you'll come back here when we're done to experience how Toso is heating and cooling this house. And of course, sit on the dock and maybe even
Oh,
jump in the water.
I love it, man. Looking forward to it. Todd, thanks so much, my friend.
Thanks, Gerry.
Wasn't that great? Todd Talbot's such a cool dude. And man, does he know his stuff. Clearly blows the what is now a misperception of what we think TV hosts of reality real estate shows are. Maybe Todd is the exception. I suspect maybe that is the way it is. He is not the norm. But man, is it cool to realize that at least some of that stuff is real. And Todd certainly knows of what he speaks. So can't thank Todd enough again for his participation. All right, everybody, it is time for Gerry's Pick of the Month. And my pick of the month is going to be somewhat self-serving and a continuation of the program, the interview with Todd. And that is Todd's website, which is aframe.com. And let me spell that out for you. EHFRAME, aframe.com, where you can learn all about the continuing saga and progress of the A-Frame project that Todd and I spoke about. But also, you can buy stuff that Todd and his wife use and endorse and sell on the website, and just get a better feel for Todd and his family and their activities. There's a blog. Again, there's a store. And yeah, I highly recommend aframe.com. Well, thanks, everybody. Our next episode will be an interview with Joel Patton of Patton Heating and Air out of British Columbia. Joel and his crew are the people who did the install, or still in the process of doing the HVAC install of the TOSO product at the A-Frame project home. And I think it would be a great follow-up to the interview with Todd. So look forward to that. Hopefully in the next 30 or 60 days, we'll have Joel Patton on the program as well. Until then, thanks everybody. See you soon, I hope.